Hello and welcome to the third video looking at the poetry anthology for year 10. So this one's about My Last Duchess, as you can see on the slide. Just very quickly, because the poem's quite long, here's the opening task I'd give you if you're in class. Just says here, sort these words from the poem into categories. So you've got colours as an example given to you. Again, spend 5 minutes or so on this, and then you've got 5 seconds on the video. So here are some examples. It's just taking the words out of context at least gives you maybe a chance to start thinking a little bit about what the poem might be about. So you have colours, white, bronze, blush, cherries. You have body parts like hands, cheek and wrist. You have feelings of happiness, glad, wonder, smile, joy, blush, my. Not sure why my is there necessarily. I guess my belonging to, the idea of my something maybe being a happy thing. Positions such as sit, stands, rise and stooping. And then looks, so like look and glance. So like the second one, I don't have a slide that just has this poem, and so it's quite a long poem. So what I'm going to do is start to read it. Again, as always, just listen to the poem and just see what you think it might be about as you go along. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands. Wilt please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seems they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fall broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that, and you disgust me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be less than so, nor plainly set, her wits to yours forsooth and made excuse. Even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Wilt please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat that the count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So again, just spend a little bit of time, have a look at it. What do you think it's about? There is a lot going on here, and it is a complex poem, but it's one where, as you understand what's going on, it will become more and more kind of obvious, I guess, as to what is going on as it happens. It is an older-fashioned poem. It is long. It has some more challenging words than the other two before, but once you get to grips with it, you'll be fine. So just some context. So this poem is based on historical events, as in Browning did take a real person and sort of use them as the kind of the inspiration for the poem that he wrote. Duke Alfonso II, he married the first of his three wives, believed to be the last Duchess, that's talked about in this, died 4 years after her wedding, and the Duke's second wife also died. I'll just get through this sort of straight away because there's a lot to be said and it's worth kind of covering. So the first thing you have to imagine, the narrative of the poem is the persona, the Duke. What he has done is he's taken a servant to one side. This is at a party for the Duke's latest engagement. So he's had a wife before, he's got My Last Duchess, she's gone. He invites someone along to look at a painting on a wall. Now, it's a painting on a wall that has sort of a covering in front of it that he has to draw to one side to show it off. And then he talks to this servant. It's worth bearing in mind for structural purposes. This is one stanza. It is effectively a dramatic monologue. It is the Duke controlling the conversation. There is a little bit of rhetorical kind of questions that are utilised by him. So we get a sense that perhaps There is some engagement by the person who's seeing the painting, but for the purposes of the power and conflict element, he is in control. He is saying what's happening. He is showing what's going on. So immediately he says, "My last Duchess." So my last Duchess, the idea of the word "my" here showing possession. She belonged to him. Now, obviously, the painting itself belongs to him, but he is talking about her as if she belongs to him. He talks about Frau Pandolf. Now, Frau Pandolf is a famous painter, so the whole point here is that the Duke begins to show off, look, this is what he did. He made this painting. He is this impressive person. This is not the only time that the Duke shows off about the things he has in his possession. He tells the person, well, please you sit and look at her. He tells the reader what to do. I mean, we're obviously reading and we sort of hear what he's saying, but he's telling the servant, here, have a look at her. Look at this picture. And he even sort of draws, with the use of the aside, here, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, he shows, firstly, that he's talking. The idea of an aside is what we use when we talk to people. But also that he is the person who has the power to show off this picture. He can show the person or not show the person. It's his decision and desire who gets to see it. And this whole idea of power is kind of explored further when he says, if they durst. Now, if they durst, but basically means if they dare. So he says, if they were as they would ask me, if they durst. It's a threatening kind of thing to say, as if like people might not question him in some capacity because they'd be scared of what he might say. What they might ask him about is the idea of the spot of joy in the Duchess's cheek. This is the kind of the crux of what leads to what goes on. On the picture, she looks very happy, and the Frau Pandolf's done a really wonderful job of capturing how kind of sort of smiley and friendly she seems, and the spot of joy that happens. And he begins to list off the ways in which she's made happy. She said it might be the fact that initially, or at least he starts by talking about how Frau Pandolf might have, been talking to her at that point and made her feel kind of special and nice, and talked about how beautiful she was, and that caused that spot of joy. She smiled when Frau Pandolf was friendly to her. But you get a sense of the jealousy of him when he says she liked whatever she looked on and her looks went everywhere. So you get this sense that actually, whilst she was probably just being polite and kind and nice to people, he actually kind of sees it differently. He sees it as her looking around, perhaps getting involved in ways that she really shouldn't. And he goes on to list other things. She smiles at everything as far as he concerns. My favourite are her breasts. So basically, a gift that he gave her, but then also the sun going down, some cherries a fool gave to her, the white mule that she rides. Everything is to be smiled at, and he is irrationally jealous of this. He thinks it is an issue that the fact that something that he gives her is valued the same as what someone else gives her is to him an issue. And he goes on even to say, like, what he seems to feel is most valuable is the idea as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. He thinks she'd be happiest with his name, the history, the idea of, by marrying him, she has become part of his lineage, and that should be the most important thing, and by proxy him. But it's clearly not the same. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? It's a rhetorical question here. He thinks that no one can blame his feelings. No one can really sort of, if that's what he's seeing and that's what he believes, he's in his right to feel jealous or in his right to feel as if something's slightly amiss. And he feels superior to ask anything of her as a woman. It makes him seem weak because he could say to her, stop doing that, or, you can't see anyone else, or you can't talk to anyone else, or you can't smile at anyone else. But actually, by asking her that would demean him. If this poem is about power, this is where you can start to make the argument that actually at this point, he doesn't have the power anymore. She seemingly has the power because he is unwilling to try and get her to change because he feels like that would in some ways be beneath him. The use of caesura, so that's the idea of the breaks in the middle, you get lots of hyphens and dashes, and even says it here, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, show you that he is getting more and more flustered. His speech is not coming together as clearly as you might expect, and it kind of shows that he's being thrown by the behaviour of his Duchess at this point. The best part, I wouldn't say best part, the bit that kind of is the big reveal, I guess, in this poem is the bit where it says, this grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. The jealousy and the fact that he's unwilling to then engage with her and say, stop doing it, the fact that it keeps continuing, he has her killed. This is perfectly summed up in these short sentences and statements. Notice how you pause, this grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. It shows how easily he had her killed. He just gave commands, and he doesn't even say that he had her killed. It kind of is an unwritten thing within the poem. It's so throwaway that it doesn't. I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it's kind of he was able to tell someone to do something. They did it. Then the smiles stopped, and that was all that mattered. So she's been killed effectively by someone, off the back of his instructions, and he then goes back. So he drops this kind of bombshell on this servant, and then he says, you can stand and we can leave. So he pulls him away at that point, and that's kind of the end of his story about the Duchess. So the end here is more to do with his next steps, and you'll see here is that he says about the Count, your master's known munificence is ample warrant for no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Effectively, I know that your Count has a lot of money. So this servant is for the Count of the new Duchess, effectively, the new person who's going to get married to the Duke. He knows that the Count's, the master's basically, or so the Count, the master of the servant, basically has lots of money and will not turn down any dowries. Therefore, the Duke is about to make a lot of money off the back of this. And it shows that the focus here is on money rather than love. He does say, though, his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. So he does say that the fair daughter is his object. But again, you can go back to the idea of the possession, the idea that my last Duchess, my possessive, and now she is the object, this new one. And just to finish off, we have this thing, notice Neptune, no, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. The narrative is circular, or cyclical in some ways. You have the idea of Fra Pandolf in the painting at the start, showing off, look at what I've got. And he leaves and says, look, here you go, here's a statue that I have as well. So once again, bragging about money and possessions. So here it just says, the rich Duke shows off the painting of his last wife, the Duchess. As the poem progresses, he reveals his jealousy about her behaviour towards other people and uses his power to have her killed. He then continues to focus on the money with references to further possessions he owns. He is egotistical and irrational in his behaviour. I'll leave this on here. Actually, I would say that's kind of the end of the poem in some ways. I mean, as I say, the main thing here is trying to get your head around sort of how power is shown through his use of rhetorical questions, the use of the dramatic monologue, the use of caesura to show his stumbling as he's talking, all those little things that he does, and kind of like the unwritten story that's going on behind here of her just being nice to people and him being jealous and eventually having her killed. This is a good example of a paragraph you might write about the theme of power in My Last Duchess, because it takes that the use of the three short statements and has a little bit of a look at what Browning is trying to do in terms of showing power in this poem. As always, any questions, do let me know. This is a challenging one because it's written in a way that is challenging, but it is a poem that in past years, whenever I've taught it, people have grown to really enjoy because of the sort of the slightly darker tone that it takes, that you don't necessarily always see coming, and the fact that the Duke himself is such an unlikable character. Stay safe, be well. I'll make sure that the next videos, because this is the first 3 videos are now up for this week, I'll make sure that the next 3 are in place for next week. Okay, bye.